What's up everybody, welcome back. We finally made it to the end. You saw the thumbnail, we have a live orchestra today playing the music. Overkill? Maybe, who cares? I've been thinking, I always wanted to end big. And I was thinking, how can we make this practical? We've tried so many different examples and genres so far, and I don't know, I was afraid this would all sound like a pointless exercise if we didn't wrap it up eventually. So what I decided to do for this episode was basically writing a piece based on the theme that we have been using so far, reusing some of the orchestrations that have been featured before, but also adding some new ones, some connecting material, and kind of try to make some sense out of everything, really. The piece I've written is pretty long, it's about 4 minutes or something like that, and there are many different things going on. So I'm thinking we should probably break it in chunks. But before we do, let me just say that this stuff is expensive. So if you guys appreciate what I do, just check out my Patreon. I've shared a ton of stuff already, including the files for the session you see me using throughout the video. That said, let's jump in with the introduction of the piece. I've imported the MIDI of the mockup back into the live mix just so you guys can still see what I'm doing. I'm gonna be showing you the score later on, but yeah, so let's have a listen to the introduction. As we just heard, we have quite a few different stuff going on in just the opening. The whole idea behind this section was to mainly have the melody being passed around different instruments. We start with a melody on the flute on bar number 6, that then moves on to the first oboe being doubled by the second flute in unison, and the first flute takes a harmony. And then on bar number 8, the melody gets taken by violin 1 and violin 2, playing 2 octaves apart, and violas as well, being doubled by the French horns. And for the accompaniment, we have some shimmery kind of textures on strings, playing tremolando, and cellos join in later on together with the rest of the woodwind section. On top of everything, we have harp doing, this kind of arpeggio, a B-flat arpeggio in open fifths. And the second half of the section is really simple. We basically have some chords on strings and brass, while the woodwinds are doing some kind of build-ups just by playing runs and some trios. Percussion, as always, is doing its usual kind of stuff with, some cymbal swells, harp glissandos, and timpani rolls. So it's a fairly busy kind of introduction, but I just wanted to showcase a few of the things that we have been talking about throughout the series, how to pass the melody around different instruments and this kind of stuff. Alright guys, so let's start by having a quick look at the closed mic recordings of, the sections of the orchestra. As I said before, I've imported the MIDI back into the mix session just for those of you who don't like scores. So let's have a listen to the woodwinds. And obviously we have a little bit of bleed from the other instruments as well, so we don't have as much separation as we usually do when I'm showing you, just the mock-up. So let's now have a listen to the strings. I think the strings are probably the instruments to get the most amount of bleed because of where they're sitting, in the orchestra, they're right in the front. But it's not too bad for these particular, recordings. So let's now have a listen to the brass. By the look of it, it seems like I changed some of the voicings. a little bit when I did the score, and that's something that, normally happens when I'm, orchestrating in my DAW. I orchestrated the piece in Logic, and then I did the score afterwards. And that's just simply because, when you're making the score, you notice things that you wouldn't normally notice just, because you have the score right in front of you and you can clearly see everything. So let's just have a listen to everything together. Alright, so let's move on to the following section. As you can see, we don't have really that much stuff going on in here. Fairly simple kind of orchestration. The melody on French horns and solo clarinet. While for the accompaniment, we basically have some kind of movement being taken by violin 1 and violin 2, doing some measured tremolo, and glockenspiel, doubling violin 1, just playing exactly the same thing, while we have some bits on cellos and double basses, just making it a little bit more playful. And, at this point, I felt like the harmony was a little bit vague, so I've added, some chords, essentially, on violas, just to reinforce the harmony a little bit. And to glue all these kind of parts together, we have some glissandos up and down, the major scale, D major. The tuning here is kind of specific because on the second bar, as you can see, we have a G sharp. We're going to the leading scale. So I just made sure to omit that note in the harp glissando because I don't want that to clash with what the viola is playing. And you'll see quite a lot of details like this throughout the score, which is really worth putting in. Then here on bar 19, we have the trumpets joining in on a big kind of build-up. I mean, not too big, still marked mezzo forte. They join in together with the trombones. What happens here on bar 21 is just they're playing some kind of rhythm. This works as some kind of answer phrase, and I think it's quite nice, creates a little bit of contrast with what happened before, which is kind of blurred, with all those glissandos and those long notes on the melody. So it creates just a little bit of contrast. And following the same logic, the harp glissando kind of stops over here, doubling essentially violin 1 and glockenspiel. So let's play a few of these elements. Let's maybe start with the brass. So as we said, we have the melody on the French horns and some kind of build-up later in the section. So let's just play that. And apologies for the really messy MIDI. Very good. Let's now hear, maybe strings and percussion so that you can hear the measured tremolo. And again, I think I changed a few of the notes when I made the score, but you get the overall idea. And finally, we said we have the harp, right? And luckily for you, the harp was recorded, in a separate room, I think, because we don't have any bleed into the harp microphone, and we can't hear it in the tree either. I mean, this is so much better than the harp that I had in the mock-up. The difference is astonishing, really. So let's now have a quick listen to the woodwinds. You are going to hear only the solo clarinet because that's all we have, and maybe a couple of bassoons lines here and there. I'm gonna play this and then we'll play everything together. And I mean, sorry if I keep smiling like an idiot. There is nothing quite like, you know, hearing your music being played by a live orchestra. So I'm gonna try to pull it together for the rest of the video, I promise. What we have here on 23 is basically a repetition of what we had before. And, you know, with a different kind of orchestration, we now have the melody taken by violin 1, violin 2, but also the first flute and the first oboe. And for the accompaniment, I still wanted to keep a little bit of that movement that we had before, you know, on the violins, but with a slightly different kind of flavor. So I've given that to violas and cellos playing legato. It has a more lush kind of sound, and they're basically arpeggiating the chord tones in contrary motion. Bass and tuba are doing the usual kind of stuff you would expect them doing, so basically just holding the tonic. And trombones are basically reinforcing the harmony, playing some chords, some pads that go underneath everything we have been talking about. We have a nice counter phrase here on the horns, building to the second half of this section. And on this part, we basically have the melody a little bit bigger, in a bigger kind of form than before, with the second flute doubling, you know, the first violin, and oboes doubling the second violin as well, but also cellos playing an octave lower together with the horns. And since the cellos are now busy taking the melody, I decided to replace basically the part that we had before, you know, in the first half of the section, with bassoons and clarinets. Then what happens on 29 and 30 are really a couple of nice swells leading to the following section. Let's start by playing the strings. Obviously, we get a lot more of the other instruments because everybody's kind of busy playing at this point, but that's normal, that's expected. So let's now play the woodwinds. And finally, brass together with percussion. I'm going to group everything together and just let it play for a bit, just for you to hear what we're about to talk about later. What I'm doing here to make sure that this part transitions nicely with the previous is just I'm making sure to hold that top D on the violin while the harmony underneath it is changing. The reason for these trills on the string section is really because I didn't want to divise the players and give up on the numbers of the players. But I still wanted the string to highlight the harmony in a block chordy kind of fashion, so this is a bit of a compromise. This phrase here on the bassoon is just really an embellishment, and what happens on the following 3 bars is some big, kind of accents, brass and strings, and everybody really are playing sforzando. I'm gonna play in a second a few of these elements, but let me just say that the main reason behind doing something like this for this whole page, both compositionally and orchestrationally, with the harmony just, getting into a more minor kind of vibe, was to set up the mood for what is about to happen in the following section. So let's have a listen to a few of these elements first. All right, so let's start by isolating the strings for this part. Very good, and as we said, the rest of the orchestra is really playing, the stabs that you heard in the background, so let's play a little bit of that. I think the harpist messed up the tuning here. I literally just noticed this. It's a very minor kind of detail though. I think it's fine. So that's it. Let's play everything together into the following section. So really simple kind of orchestration here. We have the melody taken by the first oboe. The French horns are doing the accompaniment with some chords in a staccato kind of fashion. And we have some pits on strings. And that's just, to give the section a slightly more playful kind of vibe. I didn't want it to get too serious too quickly. And we have some nice runs building to the following section. So let's have a listen to a few of these parts in isolation first. I'm going to start by playing the oboe. Let's now have a listen to the brass. It's going to be literally only the French horns. Nice and bitey. And now the string pizzicatos. So pits are really, really quiet. And now you guys know what I mean when I say that, sample library developers always mix them too loud. So big build-up going into a fanfare-ish kind of line. Everybody is playing this. The whole orchestra is playing this with violins and violas in octaves, taking the top line. Same goes with the woodwinds, while brass, so French horns and trumpets and trombones, are giving us a little bit of the harmony. Bass and percussion are doing what's expected, right? Just, giving us the bass, the tonic of the chords, and some accents on percussion. So with timpani and piatti, piatti and bitu, both times. And this big fanfare that we have in the 2 bars, 42, 43, is building into a repetition of the theme. And what you see here, Marziale, what that means is basically it just tells the conductor and the players that I want this to be played in a military kind of fashion. For this part, I'm going to isolate the woodwinds and the strings together because they are on the same roll. They're literally playing the same thing in octaves. And let's have a listen to brass. The MIDI looks so messy. This section is really strong. We have quite a lot of players on the stabs that you just heard in the background. So for that, we have basses and cellos, but also trumpets, trombones and tuba, and percussion as well, with timpani and snares. So in order to make sure that our melody doesn't get buried by all this, I kind of put the rest of the players on the melody. So for that, we have French horns playing fortissimo, and the rest of the woodwinds playing, in octaves or doubling the melody. And what happens next is basically just a repetition of what we had before. Remember, we had some runs on the previous page leading onto the fanfare, and we have exactly the same thing repeating over here at 48 and 49. So exactly the same kind of orchestration. The only difference is really the bass part. The reason is, I try not to repeat the same thing exactly the same way twice. And as expected, we are ending big with the bass parts essentially being on the same rhythm as the other instruments as well. Now, we said that on the melody we have the French horns and the rest of the woodwinds and the glockenspiel as well. So let's see if we can isolate those. I don't know, there's something about a closed mic recording of the woodwinds that gives it a very retro kind of sound straight away. It's really, really cool. So let's play the rest of the instruments. Let's play the string section in whole, and then maybe the rest of the brass. I think the brass, when it's closed mic'd, has a really, really thin kind of sound. It doesn't quite sound like this, in the final mix, because obviously, as we said before, what you get in the final mix is a combination of all different microphones working together. This looks kind of scary on the page, but there isn't that much stuff going on, to be honest. We only have, this main violin part. They're doing, the measured tremolos you just heard. And the rest of the instruments are basically just swelling in and out of the chords with violas and cellos and contrabasses doing tremolando, from piano to forte. Same with trombones, bass trombones and tuba, making this part a little bit warmer. And what the woodwinds are doing with this kind of arpeggios is basically making these build-ups a little bit stronger, using orchestration to achieve articulation, essentially. And also I forgot to mention that the harp is basically doubling the violins, and this part I think was particularly tricky to play. We have lots of pedal changes, as you can see in the score, and she did make a mistake, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. And yeah, this whole section leads into these last 3 bars where we're suddenly going from measured tremolos to legato on violins, and this change in articulation simply makes, again, for a better transition with this whole section and what is about to come next. This violin line is doubled on the oboe, just wanted to make sure that it still comes across as the most, as the lead part. And, the rest of the orchestra is just basically playing the chords, just, diminuendo to silence. Right, so what do we have here? Let's start by playing a little bit of the strings, the measured tremolos and those wells on low strings as well. Very good. So we said that on the brass we literally only have some swells. So let's play those. And now we only have the woodwinds left. Man, I'm loving these woodwinds. So let's carry on. I think this is my favorite part of the piece. I was really curious to hear how it would sound live. And the orchestration is actually quite simple. There isn't that much stuff going on. We basically have a solo flute, and the solo oboe for the melody. And for the accompaniment, we have the harp doing some arpeggios, and that's probably the most important part. And, the second flute and the first clarinet doing some trills. It's really small, and I don't know if you can see this, but it's written as whole tone trills. This whole part is basically meant to highlight this kind of 7/4 sound. While at the bottom of the page we still have strings for glue, playing flautando. It's just really soft kind of articulation, just wanted to make sure that it doesn't get in the way of the most important part, which is the solo flute. Some tremolos on the violas highlighting the most important, notes in the arpeggio, and pits on cellos and double bass, just to make it a little bit more rhythmical. I didn't want it to sound too washy with this, kind of long articulation and trills and all that. So a little bit of pits as well. I wanted this section to sound magical, right? So I've used a little bit of percussion as well. It's very subtle detail. We have triangle basically just doing some trills again, just going together with the rest of the woodwind section. And this whole section kind of terminates into some chords here at 72. I don't think there is much to say about this, to be honest. It's kind of straightforward. It's the usual type of string writing you would expect for something pretty and nice. So nice open chords with extensions and a couple of decorative lines here on the solo French horn and the solo flute as well. So I think we should probably start with the woodwinds on this one, because we have all the most important parts, really, both the accompaniment and the melody on the flute and the solo oboe. So let's play those. I think what makes the biggest difference in terms of sound is not really the whole ensemble, but these tiny, little details, all the solo parts. I mean, they're very exposed. When you're making a mock-up, it's always going to be noticeable that, it's MIDI. Let's now play the strings. So really simple stuff, just some chords really. And let's have a quick look at percussion. So we said we have the harp and triangle. So that was everything. Let's have a listen to this section again. So you might have guessed it, I'm nowhere near the end of this video. I'm sorry, I know it's annoying. I would be annoyed myself. So here's what we're gonna do now. You're still going to hit that like button, yeah, and subscribe if you're new. The files have already been shared on Patreon, so that's out of the way. I'm just gonna play the piece from the beginning until the point we reached, with the promise that in a few days, you know, the second half of the video is gonna be out. Yep. So let's take it from the top, and I'll see you very soon, I promise.